All right, welcome back YouTube. Today we're going to be covering how to approach and organize your training volume. And that is not your top sets or your super heavy weight, but the overall working weight that you have within your program, your back offs, the general training. And the goal is that by the end of this video, you will have a better understanding and a better approach to that working weight. And then you can make better progress as a result. Right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video. So like I said, we're organizing our training volume. That is the sets and reps within a workout. And our goal is that you can just understand all of this better. But before we get into that, I want to cover some key definitions so that you understand what I'm referring to when I say these words, and just a brief intro. So we know that with higher intensity, it tends to allow lifters to have the barbell feel lighter when they have heavier loads. And we know that with more reps, it allows lifters to feel more practiced on a given movement. There's exceptions to this, but this is the general rule for powerlifting. And the question is, how do we balance this, right? Every lifter, needing maybe more or less of one of these things. Well, these different approaches are gonna let you balance that to get the most out of your training. So those key definitions are intensity and exertion. A lot of the time people will think, oh, high exertion means high intensity, but they are different. And in my definition, for the sake of this video, an intensity is the percentage of your 1 rep max on the bar. So a higher intensity just means a higher percentage. So that's like you working at 80% of your max, 90% of your max. That's high intensity. 60%, 50%, that's low intensity. Exertion is the degree of effort. So your RPE, your RIR, how close you are to failure. 1 rep from failure would be high exertion. Now you could have a low intensity, right? Like 50% of your max, but at a high exertion. So 50% of your max could be like 20 reps, whatever. That's the point. Intensity, exertion, intensity, exertion, that's the difference. So we're not covering top sets. We're just covering the back off sets and then the overall volume. If you want to know more about that, comment down below and I can make a video. So here are the ways that we can organize them. These are my main ways, and then I've got some other additional options I'll cover later, but I'm just gonna get into the main ones with examples, who they help, what they accomplish, and then some additional notes. So number 1, basic, tried and true is going to be straight sets. Your 2x8, your 3x6, your 4x5, right? You could literally do so many different combinations of just straight sets, and they're typically going to be either at a percentage of your max or a certain RPE. You can vary that. There's a ton of freedom. I'm not going to cover what intensities to pick in this video and what RPEs to pick. I'm just going to cover how to organize the sets themselves. So we all know straight sets. That's very straightforward. Who do they help? So within my training system and in my experience, I find that straight sets are great for new clients and people who are at the start of a training cycle. We don't need to bring out all these fancy tools when we are taking someone on because most of the time they either don't have a lot of training history for you to get into, or if they do, it's so skewed that we don't get to go into these fancy principles off the bat. Now, some things we can. Many of these options I still will use for a new client, but straight sets are tried and true, and they're great when we just want to get a baseline down. In addition, they're great if we want basic training volume and don't need to overthink. I know some lifters who, when having these different top sets and back downs and just intricate designs of programming, they tend to overthink or maybe place a higher value on the top set or on the first back down set because it's a higher RPE, and then the volume that comes after isn't as productive. So it's good if you just want to get into it and not overthink. So it accomplishes obviously less thinking. You can be faster through your workout with, instead of you having to worry about a certain top set and a certain weight, like you can just go straight to it. Your 4x5 at 70% is straightforward and you can work up to it quickly without the thinking of these other approaches. Like I said, it can be faster to work through due to less mental investment in multiple changing sets or top sets. And then there's just going to be a greater overall quality of work because you're less likely to prioritize a top set or other sets instead. So straight sets are great. I love them. We can incorporate some of these other like ways in organizing sets to straight sets, but I like to just start with straight sets because that's just the most basic that everyone understands. Moving to the second way to organize sets, and this is my favorite, is we can call it a back off of a back off, right? It's where you're doing one set at one intensity and then another set at another intensity. And if you want, you can just continue doing that for multiple sets, or it can just be one set is at a given intensity or RPE, and then another set is another given intensity and or RPE. What I love about it is that it's so flexible. We can really fine tune the level of an intensity or rep or set that a client needs by adjusting each set. So there's just so much flexibility. That is why it's my favorite. Who it helps? In my experience, it helps those who need higher intensities but can't handle it for all of their working weight. I myself am a prime example within my current training. I need higher intensity to progress. And where my intensity is at the moment is really in like the low 60% for my squat and deadlift. And it's this thing where once I cross a certain threshold and it starts getting a little bit heavier into those like 70% of my max, I start to fall apart. My body starts to get beat up, and I should be able to handle a little more. I just don't have the work capacity at the moment. So introducing something like this where we have just one set at a higher intensity or higher exertion, but the other sets are backed off of those back offs, it can let us still have that, higher intensity without it going to all of the sets. And like I said, this is for your volume. You can still have like a top single, but then you could have like a top back down at RP5, and then the next two back downs are at, RP4 or RP3 or minus 5% of that top back down. There's just a lot of flexibility here. So what does it accomplish? It keeps the reps constant, but regulates the exertion and intensity. So we can keep sets of 5, but regulate as needed. It's great for gradually introducing higher intensities without making all the volume too heavy. And then it's great for gradually reducing intensities without making the volume too light. I've had this where clients are starting to get, overly fatigued, or maybe they're getting some minor aches and pains and they go away and then they come back, and we just go through this cycle. And we know, okay, we need to make things lighter. But in an effort to be a good coach, I don't want to just change everything and make everything way lighter. I can just reduce 2 of their 3 sets. And that's something that I'll often do is, instead of having all 3 of their back downs or all 4 of their back downs get lighter, I might just make the last 2 back down sets be another 5% drop from what the first 2 were, or the first one is. There's just, like I said, so many ways we can be flexible and regulate within this approach. Moving on, my second favorite approach is going to be ascending sets by RPE. So in this case, the example is we have a 3x5 or 1x5, 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 with each set increasing in RPE 6, 7, 8. You could also increase by a certain percentage each set. So let's just say you work up to a set at 6, and then you just add 5% to the weight that you took, and then 5% to that weight, until you reach your final set. The percentage is going to allow you to control things a bit better as opposed to RPE. I've seen clients that just take way too big of a jump on their ascending sets, and as a result, their like first or second set almost wasn't even productive. It was just way under the RPE. So that desired percent jump that's exact can be a little more tight and accurate. But this helps for people dealing with pain, which is one of the biggest ways I use ascending sets. It helps for reintroducing a movement and letting a lifter get in their groove. You haven't squatted in 3 months and you want to get back into it, and you don't know what you're going to do on a top set or on your working weight. Do ascending sets. It really lets you feel that groove. And then lastly, it's great for letting a lifter move through a workout quick. Instead of having to work up to a top set and then do back down sets, all our sets can just be ascending, and you can just get through it quickly and be done. This accomplishes the early sets functioning as a warm-up and working volume, making it more efficient. It can make your workout faster, and if we've got pain or issues, it can let you warm up more through your working weight. Some additional notes is that higher reps tend to allow for smaller increases in percentage, and smaller reps allow for bigger percentages. So if you have a 3x6 ascending, you may only need 3% increases each set, whereas with something like a 3x3, where it's just maybe higher overall working weight, you might want to jump a bigger percentage. But these are things you'll fine tune with time and experience. Now, the next point, the fourth one, back offs with an RPE cap. So we could have something like a 1x5 and then a 4x5 after, similar to the back offs of a back off, but we then add an RPE cap. And you could add the RPE cap really to any of your working weight. It's really more so just to regulate the intensity and keep the lifter at that higher intensity. So for example, you'd hit a back off set at 7, or once you hit a back off set at RPE 7 or higher, you drop down 5%, and you drop enough weight so that the following set is at 7 or just below it. So if you need a higher intensity for all of your sets and you're worried about either going too high above it or being too far below it, this just really lets you regulate by either keeping all the sets at that given percentage or dropping them down as needed. This accomplishes, like I said, regulating the RPE and where you want it to be and cap it at. Additionally, some notes are, this depends on the maturity of you or your client. Some people just aren't going to be able to follow this well. They're going to overshoot, or they're going to keep dropping down too much, and there just might be too big of a swing. So things like just straight sets or back offs where we prescribe the percentage in advance can just be a little more accurate because you get to control more within the programming. I don't tend to do this one as much just because I like to control pretty much everything in the programming, but this is something that can be used with someone who is a bit more mature and is going to follow it to a T. Now, the last one of my major approaches to organizing sets is going to be back offs with a pain cap. This is so important for someone dealing with pain to not just train through it, but find that threshold where it's acceptable to still train, but we're not going to be aggravating things into following sessions. And that would be, I like to have a 3 out of 10 pain cap. That is my typical approach. Sometimes I might make the cap a little lower, but 3 out of 10 is my typical limit. And we could throw the pain cap onto any approach. It's just going to be dependent on where the lifter's at in their training and what they need. So like I said, any set or rep structure capped at 3 out of 10 pain. And the minute you hit a rep that is above 3 out of 10, so let's say you're doing a 3x8. If on the 4th rep that pain gets to a 3 out of 10 and it's just, it's getting worse as the reps go on, you stop that set at that rep and then you drop the weight. So if we're at 300 pounds and we hit that pain on the 4th rep, drop it 20, 30, 40 pounds, depending on how bad it is. If the pain is just unbearable and it just goes from like a 1 to a 9, right? You might want to just stop what you're doing. But if that pain is just gradually increasing, but it's manageable, you can probably drop the weight a little bit and stay working within the cap. So this helps lifters with aches and pains. It accomplishes reducing the pain and letting you recover more quickly. And some additional notes is just, we ideally want it to be at a 0 to a 1 out of 10 with a little bit of discomfort because, you know, you're an athlete. You probably don't want to quit your training altogether because you have a little bit of pain. So you just work through what you can. It's just important that you stay honest. Like if you trying to push through and train through pain and then have the next session be worse and then you have more pain, it's just this endless cycle that you need to scale back a little bit to recover long term. So these are the main approaches. Straight sets are very straightforward, simple, tried and true. The back off of a back off is super flexible with so many different options. I could make an entire video on just different approaches to these back off sets. Ascending sets by RPE are wonderful. So many good uses for time management, pain, efficiency. The back off percentage lets you really regulate things tightly. And then the pain caps are so good for managing that pain within any approach you have. So hopefully you can try implementing one of these into one of your sessions, or if you're already implementing them, just refining it. I have some other options, though I don't use them quite as much in my own system, but they are ones that you can use. So we'll get into it. One thing we could do would be, we're going to be ascending our sets by the reps. So instead of ascending sets with the same reps, 1 by 5, 1 by 5, 1 by 5, we go 1 by 3, 1 by 4, 1 by 5. And this would be helpful if we wanted to hit a certain RPE, so like RP7, for example, but we want to keep the intensity lower as the sets go on. So intensity, right? I mean percentage of your max. So 300 pounds for 3, 280 for 4, 260 for 5, all at RP7. If we, maybe can't handle that heavier weight, but we still want to push it, like as far as RPE, we could do this. Though, like I said, I think there's better approaches. If we wanted to manage that pain, we could do something like an ascending set. Or if we wanted to just hit a certain heavy weight and then drop back, I'm probably just going to do that back off of a back off approach. But if you want to get creative and change the reps up and do something different, you can do this. It just allows us to keep a consistent exertion while lowering load. So it's good for load management, but like I said, it's just a less used option because I think there's other options that are a little more efficient. Now we got descending sets by reps. So this could be something like 1 by 5, 1 by 4, 1 by 3, or 1 by 5, 1 by 3, 1 by 1. This is something that I'm typically not going to use either. It lets us keep the same RPE and get to lighter weights. But like I said, I'm just probably not going to use it. I like to keep my volume at a pretty static rep count. So if I'm having a higher intensity, I'm probably just going to have it be a top set and then the back offs being higher reps. But you could organize your sets by descending reps each set. Moving on, we have descending sets by RPE. So we keep the reps the same, but then the RPE gets lower. This is something I've used, particularly on my back downs. I remember a while back, I was really pushing my squat pretty hard, but I couldn't quite handle that RPE for, like all three. So I'd have like the first one be at 8, the next one at 7, the next one at 6. And this one's also very similar to just hitting a certain weight and then just dropping off another 5%. So similar to this back off of a back off, right? This is my favorite because it combines all of these other approaches and gives us flexibility, whereas we're a little more locked in here with just the set RP. So this is another option. And then lastly, we have descending sets by the reps, but increasing RPE. So it lets us naturally increase the intensity as the reps decrease, while also increasing the exertion. I don't typically give this one either. This would be something like we're doing on like a, let's say a max out day, where as we warm up to a heavy single, we have like gradually less reps. But I wouldn't necessarily program that. So hopefully these were useful. As you can tell, as you can see, there is many different ways you can organize your back off volume. And I didn't want to make the video terribly long because there's only so much you can talk about without making its own video on each of these concepts. But hopefully now you just have a better overall understanding of how to organize things. Let me know down in the comments if there is another piece of programming you'd want me to cover, or if you want me to go more in depth on one of these concepts. I'm always looking for more video ideas. And if you guys want to see them, I want to make the video. So you tell me. It's really not a hassle. I'm always looking for more ideas of things to cover. And I hope the rest of you have a better day and make better progress because your brain grew twice the size from watching this video.